good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome you to this first Global Diaspora Virtual Exchange in 2021 titled Maximizing Diaspora Engagement, Building Trust. So iDiaspora is since 2018 a digital venue connecting global diasporas to exchange, contribute and learn from each other and from other key stakeholders working on diaspora engagement. And the overall objective of the initiative is to empower members of diaspora communities to engage as development actors by providing them with an online portal that facilitates accessing and sharing of resources from various actors and institutions, as well as to connect with other diaspora members and businesses, governments, and organizations from within or outside their own communities. Now, going back to 2020, in the midst of the unprecedented pandemic we all found ourselves in, and we still find ourselves in an effort to enhance the dialogue between diasporas and stakeholders responding to the COVID-19 crisis transnationally, iDiaspora organized 3 global virtual exchanges. And during these exchanges, we could identify some 50 different examples on how diasporas have developed philanthropic, humanitarian, health, and social transnational actions to support their communities in their host and in their home countries. And these events really demonstrated that diaspora have the capacity, the skills, and the knowledge to create transnational initiatives to support the communities in both home and host countries. But while there are extremely relevant global initiatives that emerge that accelerate diaspora's contributions to development, there's also still some key challenges that need to be addressed in order to fully harness the engagement of diaspora. And 3 such key challenges were identified in the exchanges in 2020. And these are issues that prevent diasporas to reach the full potentials. And these are lack of trust, difficulties in obtaining funding, and sustainability of their initiatives in the longer term. So this year, the global exchanges will focus on these three specific topics to be able to provide concrete strategies on how to overcome these self-identified issues. And today, we will start by focusing on how to build trust to harness diaspora engagement. Mutual trust between stakeholders at local, national, regional, global levels engaging in transnational initiatives is clearly key to build long-term relations. Trust between actors in the countries of origin and countries of residence, including governments, diasporas, international organizations, the private sectors, and members of the civil societies, enables an open communication among the multiple stakeholders, a better recognition of diaspora's needs, capacities, and interests, and the establishment of a long-standing relationships of true partnership and cooperation. So with this in mind, we will discuss today exactly these issues and try to identify the strategies to build this trust. So before passing the floor to our panelists, I would like to once again express my gratitude for this opportunity to be with you and wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. I give the floor to Nilufar.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you, Monica. Have a good evening, morning, night, even for some, as I understood, all over the world. Thank you so much for IOM and the eDiaspora platform for giving me the opportunity to be one of the moderators of this very interesting webinar that we are having today. As you can see in the in the slides, there will be an interpretation available in French, Spanish, and English throughout the webinars. And after the panelists and the respondents have spoken, there will also be a question and answer session. So again, thank you very much for for attending this webinar. I think as a diaspora in the Netherlands, I think this is a very, very interesting and also a very good opportunity to address many issues that we are facing during the past years. So as a diaspora organization that has been working for over 15 years in the Netherlands as well as in Afghanistan, we have also naturally faced many challenges within our field of work, and which is mostly, as was just said, to gain funds, but to also have the mutual trust and understanding of many individuals, but also many parties involved in diaspora work. And I think that is one of the many good reasons that these platforms have been formed in the past years, such as the Global Diaspora Confederation and the eDiaspora platform, that gives us the opportunity to exchange knowledge, but also to exchange experience and to learn from each other in order to be able to build more sustainable projects, but also to build more sustainable communities in our home countries and our host countries. So without further ado, I would very much like to start the discussion today with our astonishing panelists and respondents. I think it's a wonderful team that the organization has put together today. I am very much impressed with all of their work in the past years. And the main issue that we're going to address today is, as was said before, the building of trust. So we will discuss why trust is relevant in diaspora engagement and how stakeholders can and diaspora communities can maximize trust. But also, how do stake workers working on diaspora engagement can build trust at many levels within their countries of origin and in their host countries. And of course, at the end, also how to strengthen that mutual trust among the different parties, because it's not only the diaspora organizations that are involved in this. There are governments involved in both countries and many countries, and on many levels there are parties who are involved and who need to work together in order to have really sustainable projects and sustainable organizations and sustainable communities. So I would very much like to give the floor to our panelists. The program is as such that I would like to give each panelist 5 minutes the time to respond to these questions. And then afterwards, we will engage our respondents as well. So the first panelist that I would like to ask to respond to these questions is Professor Alexandra Delano. She is Associate Professor and Chair of Global Studies at the New School. And she is also a co-founder and former co-director of the Zolberg Institute on Migration. She has done a lot of work on the matter of migration and diaspora. She has published many articles and books, and she has also done research focusing on diaspora policies, the transnational relationships between states and migrants, migration in the Central America, Mexico, US corridor, sanctuary, and the politics of memory in relation to borders and violence. Just amazing. So I would very much like to ask Professor Alexandra Delano to first to respond to these questions and share her experience with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. And I want to say hello to all the people attending the session, as well as the panelists. It's a true privilege and honor to be here with you. And I was very excited to see the call for a conversation about trust in relation to diaspora engagement, because I absolutely agree that it's essential for the goals of diaspora engagement to really fulfill the needs of migrant communities, as well as the interests of states, and fill some of the gaps that exist in terms of access to rights in the process of migration. And I mean that both in relation to the rights of migrants in the state where they arrive, as well as in their state of origin. But trust is extremely difficult to build between migrants and their countries of origin, particularly when we're talking about a migration that was not a choice, but a forced decision, whether for economic reasons or for political persecution or a situation of violence. So we have to first establish that when we talk about diasporas, we're talking about very different experiences. So it's very different to talk about diasporas coming from countries in the global north versus diasporas in the global south, and the different reasons for their migration, as well as their characteristics. And building trust will be very different according to these different circumstances and characteristics. In my case, if I'm focusing more on Mexican or Central American migrants coming to the US or Canada, I think one of the first questions that arises here is, how can a state that did not provide for the conditions for a life with dignity or for the right to remain in the country of origin offer something, or be trusted to offer something when it's precisely the conditions that someone is fleeing and escaping? So I think that's the first challenge in terms of building trust with a set of institutions and governments that are already in a state of distrust and tension with the migrant population. And secondly, if there is an effort to do outreach and connect with these populations, how can they not be seen as efforts to co-opt for either for economic or political reasons that migrants will resist, because they're just seen as opportunistic and taking advantage of their resources. But at the same time, there is a recognition that there is a space that the state of origin has to fill in terms of addressing some of the needs that these populations have. And there is a clear interest for the migrants as well to have a connection with their state of origin and what it can offer in relation to economic needs, in relation to remittances and families that remain in the country of origin, in relation to political rights, be it voting rights or the possibility to run for office or participate in other ways in their countries of origin, and also social rights, including access to health, access to education. And I mean that again, in relation to both their country of origin and their country of destination, thinking about social protection from a transnational perspective. And it is clear in my research that the countries of origin can fill really important gaps when it comes to populations that live in a precarious status, whether that means advocating for labor rights or for financial access or for access to education or health in both of their countries. So there is a space here where there is mutual interest and mutual need. And the question is how to build that in a way that is sustainable and that can have a sense of accountability, where trust is the essence that allows programs to be built and policies to be built that serve these interests of both migrants and states, and can have can develop into something that goes beyond just the immediate goals of political and economic interest in the short term, but that can really create opportunities for development, for access to right, for life with dignity in both countries of origin and countries of destination. So I'll suggest 3 points that I think are fundamental for this building of trust. And the first one is that these agendas, the policies, the programs that are developed have to be agendas that are built together by diasporas and by states. There need to be spaces for joint decision-making and cooperation and true representation of migrant communities. This is the only way that allows for the state to truly understand the needs and to respond to them. But it also allows for migrant communities to truly understand what is available and then advocate for that within the spaces that can be fully recognized as spaces that are trying to respond to their needs. So it has to come with first spaces of consultation, then spaces of true representation that are continuous, that are not just dialogues that take place once one time and then are ended, but that they have to be spaces where migrants know that they can continuously advocate for their agendas, that their agendas are heard, and that their agendas are being implemented. So I think it's consultation, representation, implementation, design and implementation, and after implementation, also evaluation. It cannot exist, like full trust cannot exist if it's only one part of that. I often see, you know, the many attempts to create these spaces of consultation, and they happen over and over again, to the point where diasporas just feel they're being exploited to get information, and for governments to say that they've had a consultation and the agendas come from those consultations, but there's never follow-up and there's never a true representation when migrants can continue to see whether their interests are being served by these agendas and where they can participate in the full process of agenda setting, design, implementation, and evaluation. The second point is resources and continuity. This has already been mentioned by Monica, right? How can these, once the agendas are set, how can these spaces and these policies become sustainable? And so first of all is, you know, how resources are dedicated to these policies. And we see over and over how those resources change according to political interests and economic dynamics, which creates a sense of mistrust again, because the agendas change year to year, priorities are reset by new administrations, and they shift again according to political interests rather than serving continuous needs of the diaspora. And so the processes are repeated over and over again. Sorry, that's my dog. And in order for them to be sustainable, there has to be transparency in what those resources are, what those commitments are, and a commitment to continuity in those resources, regardless of whether there are changes in the administration. So having, for example, in the Mexican case, Ministry of Foreign Affairs with an autonomous institution, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, that could have its own budget that is not subject to changes in political administration, seems to be fundamental in order for that space to be autonomous and for it to be institutionalized in a way that it doesn't have to change every time there is a changing leadership. That has not been the case. I'm talking here in all these points, I'm talking about ideal situations where I still don't see a model that has completely fulfilled these possibilities, either in terms of representation of migrant communities or in terms of dedicating resources and having spaces for to guarantee a continuity in access to these resources and their implementation. And the third point would be going back to the idea of transparency and accountability. How are the resources used? How do governments report about the budgets that are being committed to these programs, how they're being used, and the mechanisms through which the migrant communities can evaluate whether the resources have been used according to the priorities that were set together. I think this is a point that creates most tension between the communities. And one of the ways in which those have been buffered in the Mexican case, for example, have been through including third parties in these collaborations. So it's not just the state of origin and that government and the migrant communities, but alliances with other institutions in the country of destination or foundations and other groups that can also help minimize or create a different space of accountability where resources are coming from different places, where implementation is also being supported by other parties, right? Like hospitals or clinics that they collaborate with, or schools, or ministries from both countries, or institutions, governmental institutions at the local level in both spaces. And that creates tensions, but that also allows for opportunities for more diversity in terms of, and democratization in terms of decision-making, use of resources, and other mechanisms to evaluate whether those resources are being used in the ways that they're initially designed to do. So in conclusion, I don't know if I've exceeded already my time, but I would just suggest for now, for the beginning of our discussion, to think about how it can be possible to create horizontal spaces for continuous dialogue between the migrant communities and the governments that are trying to create these forms of engagement, spaces that have true representation. And that is really difficult because it's unclear on both sides what that representation means. Who represents the diaspora, right? Which representatives of the diaspora can have a seat at the table? And on the other hand, who in the government represents this agenda and the different institutions that exist in countries of origin to respond to these agendas that are not always just in one place. Sometimes they're divided between different ministries that have to implement programs at different levels. Second, full participation in design, implementation, evaluation, and mechanisms for accountability that are difficult to build because they already don't exist in the countries of origin. And that is part of the tension that pervades, from beginning to end of this relationship, from the moment of migration to the establishment in a country of destination, and then the possibility of creating opportunities for engagement that serve all the interests of the diversity of diaspora groups and also of different elements or different actors within the countries of origin, different governments at the local, state, and federal level, but also the communities that the migrants are connected to, and that they want to collaborate with the state because they're interested in their families, in their communities back home, and how those interests can be truly represented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Alexandra Delano. Those are really, really good points that you have pointed out. And it really amazes me because, as you said, countries are very different from the global north to the global south, and every country is, again, very different. But at the same time, all the points that you just mentioned are so recognizable for me as being from the Afghan diaspora, because those are exactly the points that we as Afghan diaspora would also like to work on. As what you said, the transparency of the resources being distributed, from the implementation to every point that you just mentioned. It's really recognizable for us as well. So that makes the discussion, I think, as well, even more interesting, as we do have many more things in common, apparently, than we think across the globe. So I'll go to our next panelist, Mr. Mackendy Tupousson. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, who has been an active member of many organizations for many years, since 1994, among which the Development Aid Association for Haiti, the Plateforme des Associations Franco-Haïtiennes de France, the treasurer and also president of this organization, and he has also been the formerly treasurer and of the Forum, and the French Platforms of Diaspora, which is the French for Platform for Diaspora, and its president as well since 2019, as I see here. Besides this, he has also been politically involved in the past years. So this makes it even more interesting to hear his points of view about how to build trust within communities and with our countries of origin. So without further ado, Mr. Mackendy. Yes.
Bonjour, merci. Donc, l'intervention se fera en français et je voudrais tout d'abord dire un bonjour et un bonsoir avec le décalage horaire. Je voudrais remercier les organisateurs de cet échange avec ce sujet qui fait résonance dans l'action collective, et mes salutations et remerciements également aux panélistes. Et effectivement, ce qu'a abordé le professeur va rentrer complètement dans l'expérience du Forum. Tout d'abord, vous dire que c'est une fierté pour le Forum et moi-même d'être à vos côtés pour aborder cette thématique. Tout d'abord, je commencerai par une brève présentation du Forum. la plateforme française des Diaspora, créée en 2002 par le travail de collectifs de diaspora installés en France et avec le soutien du ministère des Affaires étrangères français, qui à cette époque cherchait à organiser et structurer les diasporas en vue d'en faire de réels partenaires dans la mise en place de ce que l'on a appelé à l'époque et qu'on appelle encore aujourd'hui le co-développement, c'est-à-dire de capitaliser sur les migrations internationales pour favoriser le développement des territoires d'origine. Souvent, au niveau du forum, on est sur deux pôles. Le pôle ici, on dit sur le territoire d'accueil, dans le pays d'accueil, et le pôle là-bas, qui est le territoire d'origine. Donc, le forum est une plateforme de collectifs et de fédérations organisées en trois grandes familles. Les fédérations de pays, regroupées selon les pays d'origine, par exemple avec le Haut Conseil des Maliens de France, ou encore l'Union générale des Vietnamiens de France. À la suite de ces fédérations, le forum a aussi cherché à impulser la création de collectifs en région, regroupant ce qu'on appelle les organisations de solidarité internationale issues des migrations, donc les OSIM, par territoire d'accueil en France. Il en existe une dizaine aujourd'hui. Enfin, dernier membre de cette famille, on regroupe des collectifs structurés par thématique. Donc, on a une entrée jeunesse et une entrée genre, telle que l'Association des jeunes guinéens de France ou l'association FECODEV, Femmes et contributions au développement. Dans sa mission première, le forum vise à structurer, renforcer, appuyer les diasporas en France avec l'approche fondamentale qu'est cette structuration et ce renforcement de capacité que les diasporas seront en mesure de remplir leur rôle à part entière au sein des acteurs de la solidarité internationale, tout en favorisant le vivre ensemble et la citoyenneté ici et le développement de nos pays d'origine, le là-bas. Nous pilotons également un dispositif qu'on appelle le PRAOSIM, qui est le programme d'appui aux organisations issues des migrations, qui cofinance à hauteur de 15 000 € des projets de développement local portés par des associations de la diaspora. Aujourd'hui, ce sont près de 80 initiatives que nous soutenons chaque année. Alors, le thème de cette table ronde est la construction de la confiance entre les acteurs agissant sur l'engagement de la diaspora. C'est effectivement primordial. Nous l'avons expérimenté directement lors de la création du forum avec le ministère des Affaires étrangères français. Les diasporas ont en effet des pratiques spécifiques et parfois contrastent un peu par rapport à des acteurs considérés comme plus classiques, comme les ONG établies. L'identité bénévole, les modes de gouvernance, de financement sortent dans une certaine mesure de la norme, et il a fallu que ces acteurs diasporiques et le ministère s'engagent dans une réelle dynamique de partenariat, de dialogue et, in fine, de confiance pour aboutir à la création du forum et à la mise en place de dispositifs précis tels que le PRAOSIM. Convaincre les autorités françaises de débloquer une enveloppe financière dédiée spécifiquement aux diasporas. Ça n'allait pas de soi. Il a fallu que des alliés, des fonctionnaires de l'État au sein du ministère des Affaires étrangères fassent le lien et convainquent de la force que représentent les diasporas dans leur initiative. Pour autant, cette confiance n'est jamais garantie. Pour le forum, la séquence ouverte par l'élection de l'ancien président Nicolas Sarkozy et la création du ministère de l'Immigration et de l'Identité nationale a été difficile, car les prérogatives ministérielles ont changé, avec la volonté de placer les financements du co-développement sous contrôle direct du ministère de l'Intérieur. En quelques mois, c'est plus de 5 ans qui ont été remis en cause, remis en question. Et les diasporas sont passés de partenaires à des acteurs suspects qu'il s'agirait de contrôler. Cette séquence a également fissuré la confiance créée avec les autres acteurs de la société civile. La confiance ne peut s'instaurer que sur la durée et doit être perpétuellement renforcée, mais elle doit s'accompagner d'autres composantes cruciales, d'autres vertus. La transparence. Pas de confiance sans transparence de l'information, sans partage des projets, des initiatives, des réussites et des défis à relever. La construction d'une relation de confiance ne peut se passer d'un partage et de réunions régulières, notamment lorsque des difficultés opérationnelles se profilent. Je pense que nous avons toutes et tous expérimenté des tensions dans la conduite de nos activités lors de la crise qui nous frappe depuis plus d'1 an maintenant. Pour notre réseau, qui vit au rythme des rencontres et avec ses membres, des espaces de travail, du lien, ce fut une période particulièrement éprouvante. La restriction des déplacements en France, mais surtout à l'international, a bien souvent empêché les diasporas de poursuivre le travail engagé. Notre programme en a été affecté, mais c'est grâce à des échanges quasi hebdomadaires avec nos bailleurs de fonds que nous avons été en mesure de réorienter certaines de nos activités et, par exemple, de mettre à disposition un fonds de 24 000 € pour nos membres qui étaient engagés dans des actions de solidarité en France, au sein de leur communauté, durement touchée par la maladie et la crise socio-économique qui s'installait et s'installe durablement, notamment pour les travailleurs précaires ou les étudiants. Cela n'aurait sans doute pas été possible sans cette fameuse relation de confiance. Deuxième valeur cardinale qui rejoint la première, l'honnêteté. Aujourd'hui, le Forum a la possibilité de dialoguer ouvertement avec le ministère des Affaires étrangères et l'AFD, l'opérateur du ministère, et par ailleurs principal bailleur du Forum. Dialogue sur les difficultés qu'il rencontre dans l'évolution de son réseau, le renouvellement des instances, la nécessaire ouverture à d'autres pays de diaspora et à des fédérations d'autres pays. À l'aube de nos 20 ans, en 2022, nous avons choisi d'axer notre programme triennal actuel sur la refonte de notre projet associatif et notre planification stratégique à 10 ans afin de répondre aux défis d'un monde en transformation, dont les diasporas sont le reflet. Pour celles et ceux d'entre vous qui sont rodés au dispositif de financement des ONG, cela peut paraître comme un choix risqué. Accepter de ralentir le rythme quotidien des actions, appuyer sur pause, petite pause évidemment, et prendre le temps d'une réflexion collective. C'est peut-être prendre le risque de ne plus répondre aux attentes toujours plus élevées que nos partenaires placent en nous. Au cours de multiples discussions avec nos partenaires institutionnels, ceux-ci ont été très respectifs de cette approche et l'ont encouragée, car ils comprennent que ce temps de renforcement nous permettra de remplir encore mieux nos missions et d'accompagner au mieux notre réseau dans les prochaines années au risque d'un essoufflement. Mais attention, l'honnêteté veut aussi dire assumer son identité, rester entier, surtout dans le contexte politique que nous connaissons actuellement, dans lequel les migrations sont pointées du doigt comme responsables en partie des maux de nos sociétés et les migrants victimes de stéréotypes. Dans ce contexte, il n'est pas question pour nous de transiger avec nos principes fondateurs. Notre boussole, construire autour des droits humains, de notre vision de la contribution positive des migrations à nos sociétés de départ et d'accueil. Nous publions régulièrement des communiqués, des lettres ouvertes, sommes actifs au sein de coalitions de la société civile pour rappeler que les migrations sont une chance et qu'elles ne doivent pas être diabolisées. Nos prises de parole y compris dans des environnements institutionnels, vont dans ce sens et ne sont pas négociables, y compris lorsqu'on sent une inflexion venant d'en haut de nos vis-à-vis. Nous ne modifierons pas notre discours afin de sécuriser des financements, car ce reniement mettrait paradoxalement notre organisation en danger en brouillant notre identité. Nous sommes engagés au sein des États généraux des migrations dans la dynamique des forums sociaux mondiaux contre l'apathie des États européens sur la situation en Méditerranée. Et c'est sur cette base que nous souhaitons construire nos relations de confiance. J'ai beaucoup parlé de nos relations avec les autorités françaises, mais bien évidemment, lorsqu'on parle d'engagement des diasporas, n'oublions pas le là-bas, les autorités de nos pays d'origine, qui sont en pleine construction et structuration de leur stratégie vis-à-vis de leurs ressortissants à l'étranger. Ici aussi, la relation de confiance est primordiale afin de faire en sorte que les projets et parts portés par les diasporas soient plus impactants localement. Mais pour ce faire, pour sortir du micro-projet territorial, l'engagement des autorités locales est nécessaire. Leur rôle de facilitateur dans l'obtention des permis, la reconnaissance des associations sur place, le dédouanement, etc., doivent permettre aux organisations de migration, de migrants, de réaliser leurs projets avec confiance, dans un environnement stable et transparent. Comment construire cette relation? Nous organisons depuis 10 ans des rencontres internationales sud, je vais bientôt terminer, qui sont des espaces de dialogue multi-acteurs, pilotés par les collectifs de diaspora eux-mêmes et qui mettent autour de la table des organisations de la société civile locale, des diasporas, des autorités nationales, des agences de développement, les médias, les secteurs privés, dans le but de valoriser l'action des diasporas et de s'engager sur des plans d'action concrètes pour faciliter les activités, les initiatives des OSIM dans leur pays. Nous avons organisé près de 15 rencontres internationales sud, dont certaines se sont matérialisées par des conventions. La Guinée, le Maroc et bientôt le Ghana, ou par des mécanismes durables de dialogue tels que nous l'effectuons au Togo. Dans ce cadre, la confiance se crée par un donnant-donnant. Le forum est souvent peu connu dans le pays, donc il faut être en mesure de mettre sur la table des réussites, des propositions, de jouer son rôle, mettant en lumière les réussites des projets en offrant une ouverture médiatique, un espace de dialogue avec des acteurs qui parfois se parlent peu, pour des raisons historiques, politiques. C'est à partir de ces engagements, de ce sérieux, que l'on peut, en échange, recommander l'engagement des autorités sur certains éléments. Il ne s'agit pas de réinventer la roue, de viser des changements institutionnels profonds, mais plutôt d'assumer une approche des petits pas dans laquelle tout le monde, en jouant sa part, peut faire bouger les lignes au sein des organisations. En conclusion, la confiance ne se décrète pas. Les diasporas restent des acteurs atypiques, encore peu reconnus par les autorités, ou en tout cas moins visibles que d'autres acteurs historiques. C'est à nous de faire le travail de fond, de valoriser notre travail, de retrouver des alliés qui peuvent ouvrir des portes et engager leurs institutions dans des relations partenariales durables, sans lesquelles notre engagement restera une goutte d'eau. Je vous remercie de votre écoute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dubuisson, for this very elaborate and interesting point of view, actually, because I think it is quite interesting to see the work being done from another perspective, as Forum is, I think, a good example of how to also approach diaspora and build a stronger diaspora foundation, and then from there build stronger ties and bonds with local and national authorities, as you mentioned. I think this could be a good example for more countries maybe to build their diaspora communities and build more trust with local authorities, which we will discuss further as well, I'm sure. So our third panelist is Dr. Hodan Osman Abdi. She's a university lecturer and associate research fellow at the Institute of African Studies at Zhejiang Normal University. She has, among others, obtained her PhD in communications studies from this university and has also got an MA in Chinese language. She has done a lot of research, many articles, many publications and books, and among which also research focusing on the China-Africa relations and the Belt and the Road Initiative. Again, from a very different perspective, I'm very interested to know how you see these issues.
Thank you, Nilofar, for the wonderful introduction. And I'd like to thank the team here, the organizers of this conference, for inviting me. Diaspora and diaspora engagement is a very interesting topic and a topic of deep interest for myself. As you've mentioned before, I've lived for an amount of about 15 years of my life in China, where I was myself an African diaspora. And there is where I started getting more in-depth knowledge and experience in what it actually means to be a diaspora in a country like China, what it means to be an African diaspora in a country like China, the importance of collectivity of the African diaspora themselves in an environment such as China. I'm from Somalia, and like I've mentioned before, I've spent 15 years working and studying in China. During this time, diaspora engagement or engagement within diaspora communities from different countries in China was extremely important, not only for our mental and social well-being as an African diaspora in a foreign country where language, culture, everything is completely different, but also was very important in the sense of the need that was actually present for mutual support. So for example, African diaspora communities that sub-branched according to different countries. For example, the Somali diaspora, the Ghanaian diaspora, the Nigerian diaspora were an important lifeline for the support of new businesses, new students, and just new migrants to China from these African countries. These networks were a very, very important lifeline to introduce the different cultures, laws, rules, and regulations of the country and help with language issues, especially to new coming people from our different countries. My work with the Institute of African Studies at Zhejiang Normal University for the first couple of years also focused on the presence of the African communities in China and their diaspora organizations. One of my first works that I've done with the university was produce a 6-episode documentary film that documents the life of the African diaspora in a small town city called Yiwu, which is located in Zhejiang province in China. This city was of particular interest to us, given the entire rhetoric about the African diaspora in China, and there was a lot of negative reporting about the different aspects of their lives in China. So we wanted to do a more in-depth look at the realities of their lives and how living in China was actually impacting their lives and well-beings. If you can access a couple of episodes on YouTube, but most of it was viewed on CGTN4, the entire series. And what we found is these diaspora communities, especially diaspora organizations, had a very important role in actually influencing the rules and regulations of a country like China, which we all know it's almost near impossible to influence their laws and regulations to suit a specific group of people or a group of culture. So the diaspora communities that lived in Yiwu, whether the Arab communities, whether the Yemeni communities, the Sudanese, the Nigerian, the Ghanaians, the Somali diaspora communities, these communities became extremely actively engaged with the local governments, and the local governments actually preferred having this entity through which they can channel their communication. So for example, if there were new laws and regulations, they would depend on these organizations to go and translate them and make sure that everybody in the community understood them well and also followed them. Now, this is the one direction of the communication, but the flip side of the communication was that these communities became a driving force that actually drove investment and drove not just fundraising, but also, tentative investment, tangible investment back to their countries through their Chinese networks. So these organizations that were reliable, they brought together the friends and the acquaintances of all the members of these diaspora communities, and collectively they were able to communicate the investment needs and investment opportunities that existed in their back and local communities. And through this, they were able to mobilize Chinese investors to go back and do business and invest in their own countries and their local communities. And this is something that's of extreme importance. Once you reach a certain influence as a community or diaspora community in a host country, especially one like China, that is so vast and mature, I guess the impact can also be monumental. Now, on the other side, looking at another diaspora dimension, the one in which I found myself living in right now, which is in Somalia. I've been in Somalia for the past 2 years, luckily, throughout the COVID-19 situation. What I've witnessed here is the amount of influence the Somali diaspora across the world has on the Somali communities here. The interdependency is really remarkable. On the one hand, the Somali community in general is extremely dependent on remittances from the Somali diaspora that are scattered around the world. The remittances, or the money that they send back to Somalia, accounts to 40% of our national GDP, which is a very, very significant number. 40% of our GDP comes from the Somali diaspora abroad. That means they are sustaining livelihoods. They are sustaining the basic services that have been missing for the past 30 years of instability in Somalia. This is how much diaspora is important. However, the problems that we've stated before and the doctor stated before with regards to trust, fundraising, and sustainability still exist. I have seen and witnessed examples of very noble acts from the Somali diaspora, where they try to build schools, they try to build hospitals, they raise a lot of amounts of money. For example, there's a group of my friends that a couple of years ago, they raised $600,000 to build 2 hospitals in local communities and around Buhodla, which is in Sol Sanag al Ain, which is northeastern part of Somalia. This is an area where aid doesn't reach because of instability on the ground. This is an area that doesn't have active governance because of clashes between 2 neighboring organizations or administrations. So people who were from that area, they decided to raise funds and build hospitals. They've raised $600,000. They've built 2 hospitals. Now, the hospitals are there as buildings, but how do you sustain these efforts? How do you make sure that the doctors still get paid? How do you make sure that the medicines that they need still gets bought? How do you make sure that maintenance is kept very well in this place? So the issue of sustainability of the noble acts and the noble efforts, especially the fundraising efforts of diaspora communities, still exists across communities, across all diasporas around the world. And I think it is something that we really need to think of with new lenses and find innovative solutions to. The online, boom recently in fundraising, especially GoFundMe pages that sprout all across the globe, these kind of platforms provide us with a new way of thinking. If we can also digitalize these diaspora communities, we can also perhaps answer the issues of trust because everybody on that platform would literally know of everybody and would see the track record of what they have actually done and achieved on the ground. And through that act, we would be able to establish, some level of semblance of trust, right? And perhaps digitalization of our diaspora communities across the world could also bring us all closer together, so that right now we are dependent on who knows who. So when we're fundraising, we call somebody we know in the UK, somebody we know in the US, and we ask them to go into their local communities and collect the funds from them. Now, however, if we had a digitalized method of bringing everybody from a single, with a single common identity, whether it's a nationality, it's a region, it's a religion, whatever the identity is that brings them together, if we can have effective digital platforms that can perform this, then we can perhaps resolve the issues of trust, sustainability, and the issue of transparency in fundraising. Thank you very much again. I will just keep my intervention to this much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of our participants to hear more of your insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdi. I think those are again very, very valid points that you've brought before us. And what I hear from all panelists actually is one point that has been made out by all of you is the transparency. And I think that is one of the main issues that we all need to work on. I think you all agree with that. Besides many other very valid points that you've all mentioned. I would now like to ask our respondents, our two respected respondents who are also attending today, to react on our panelists, and if you would like to react on any point that has been made up by them, or any other point that you would like to mention regarding building trust. Our respondents are Ms. Nahida Sobhan. She is the first, this is amazing, the first female Bangladeshi diplomat in the Middle East. That is wonderful. And she has been serving in many as a foreign service officer, among others. And in the 15th batch of Bangladesh Civil Service Foreign Affairs Cadre as well. Again, I'm very, very interested to know how you see these suggestions and how we as diaspora can build trust with the governments of our host countries and of course the home countries or where we are born. How do you see this? Which way is the way forward for us?
Thank you very much, Ms. Mili, for having me. And let me first thank the DRHBT for organizing this meeting, focusing on diaspora, and also inviting me to your audience. I would rather say that from the panelists,
I'm sorry, I think the sound is very of low quality. I don't know if everyone else is hearing her well.
Yeah, is it better now?
A bit better, yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to thank first DRHBT for convening this program event and particularly focusing on diaspora, because this is the part I think a lot of time we miss out on this. And also thank you very much for inviting me to here. Thank you for having me. I would say
we still can't hear you very well.
I don't know how
there's a lot of background noise.
Is it better? Because I really don't know how to. I'm a very low skill technology person.
This is a bit better. I think if you speak a bit more closer to the microphone, I think that helps. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that currently you are the ambassador of Bangladesh to Jordan. That I forgot to mention. Yes.
Thank you very much. But I've been listening to all and trying to learn more than what I need to say. So I'll just share some of the things from my experience, what I've seen in terms of diaspora. And I think some of the comments that I've been listening to, I'll just take three from there and then I will add mine. One is that the recognition that the diaspora is building communities and also contributing in the development of both the countries of origin and destination. That is something that would give the diaspora the feel also that they're recognized, and then that would make them, you know, trying to be more friendly and also trying to be more contributing more. That's one thing. Secondly, the positivism to start with. The positivism in the sense that when we need to engage from the like the civil society or from the local authorities, I think we need to start working from a positive mindset, no matter the origin and also no matter the reason for which a diaspora is in a certain different country, because that gives them the confidence, that gives them the kind of feeling, you know, it gives us the psychological feeling that I'm not looked upon as somebody who is who doesn't come from a very good situation, so we are weak and we cannot contribute much. So that negative concept has to move out. So look at diaspora or engage with diaspora both from the government side in the local host country as well as from the origin country, and also from the civil society. Look at diaspora with a very positive look. Uh, Secondly, the involvement of local authorities is very important, and there it has to be that you know, they have to produce a sense of inclusiveness towards the diaspora, because many a times, no matter how long they live in a country, they still feel not included, and that gives a kind of barrier uh, between the diaspora, the local communities, and also those who will be engaging with the diaspora. I'm sure these are the things that has been, you know, going on over and over again, but I think as two important areas I need to mention it, and I've been listening to other speakers mentioning some of these areas. The host country is environment is important to make the diaspora feel that they are part of it, and also to make the diaspora feel that they can contribute more, both in the country of origin as well as in the country of destination. It is the environment of the host country includes not just the, you know, the policies, but the laws also of the host country. Now, one thing is important, that the diaspora also has a responsibility, I think, to create trust among the local communities and the host country, and as well as the country of origin. I say that because many a times I find from my experience that sometimes people, the migrants or the diaspora, it is very important for them to abide by the local laws and also to engage with the local cultural activities. So if we stay away from that, so that would go as a responsibility, I would say, more on part of the members of diaspora and also from the local community to give them the feeling of that hospitality and engage them with the local community um, cultural activities and traditional activities. It is not like that I want to change your way of living or I want to change your tradition or culture. No, but you know, it gives the feeling of inclusivity. Like if I have a festival, you can come and join with me. Or if you have a festival, I can go and join with you. So that is something that we create a trust, I think. I talked about the host country environment and importance of it because if I look at the Bangladeshi diaspora in different countries, then I can see the difference of the diaspora behavior. Diaspora in one country contribute or behave in a different way, and the diaspora in another country contribute and behave in a different way. But they all come from the same origin country, going all from Bangladesh. But still, in a different country, they can behave differently. So I give you an example, like the diaspora in Canada has been very active in many areas. I know that very recently they created one Shahid Memorial in Toronto. And you know, the diaspora, Bangladeshi diaspora in Canada was the key element that created the International Mother Language Day, which was you know, a historical event in Bangladesh. So that's why I say that the host community and host government's environment, you know, is important to engage with the diaspora and to activate the diaspora. Activate meaning they will make them more contributing, more active, and more social. In Bangladesh, as a country of origin, we have been trying to engage in our development a lot, which is quite good because we have a huge contribution of our migrants and diaspora in our GDP. And for that, the government has also created a number of areas where the diaspora can engage directly through investment. There are a number of you know, facilities given for the diaspora if you invest in Bangladesh. Which includes and also areas like wage earners bond and you know, giving facilities to them in that. I will stop here now. Just one last point before I stop, so I can come back later if you want. I see that the Global Compact on Migration, where I always do that, has addressed, you know, in a very, I would say, very limited way or a very focused way in the diaspora in Objective 19. So there are some actions that we can look into, and we can always.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ambassador Naida Sobhan. I'm sorry if the sound was not well heard by everyone. I'll just shortly point out two very important things that she said because I wouldn't want you to miss that out. First was to recognize the recognition of diaspora as stakeholders in our home countries and the countries of the host countries actually, and to build the agendas together as was also said before, and to also joint decision making and implementation together. And the second point, which is very valid as well, is to include and engage the diaspora in the host countries and to activate them. I think those are very important issues also for host countries to think of and of course to use the diaspora. Thank you very much for your points being made. Then I would very much like to ask our honorary consul, Mr. Paul Raymond P. Cortez, the Consul General of the Philippines to Dubai and the Northern Emirates, to also share his points of views with us, please.
Thank you very much, Nilufar. It was such a beautiful chance to listen to the very erudite speakers from the academe, Professor Delano, to Pison and Dr. Hodan, as well as Ambassador Sobhan. And, you know, these researchers, these perspectives come from a segment of society that enjoys quite a spot because they're here trying to understand migration from a very academic and research perspective. This perspective that I will be speaking on will be some from an element of society that people actually do not trust. And this is the difficult part because here we are trying to build trust with our diaspora when we ourselves, the government that they had left behind back home is precisely why they had left. As far as the Filipino experience is concerned, many of our migrants have left the country simply because of economic opportunities that are not present back home in the Philippines, as well as issues related to governance. So this is something that a lot of the Filipino migrants see when they go to the United States, when they go to the EU, when they go to the Gulf countries. I've had the privilege of being posted in Europe, in the US, and now in the Middle East, where we have a Filipino migrant community that is very active and very well entrenched in the political, economic, and sociocultural situation of the countries they have chosen to migrate to. sadly, many of our migrants do not see the attempts of the Philippine government for collaboration as a genuine interest in trying to come up with a policy that will make not only development for the migrant community well and active, but as well as their contributions to the country, to their home countries. Mostly, they see the attempt of government to reach out to them as something of political expediency for electoral gains, so that you have the countries coming over. I'm sorry, you have the officials trying to reach out to the migrant communities only because they wanted to be re-elected or to perpetuate themselves in power, and not primarily for the continued development of the country. Trust or co-optation between the government, and in this case, the missions, the diplomatic missions, the embassy and the consulates general, and of course, our migrant community must lead to an eventual participation in national development. Now, we are not just speaking only of remittances. It's a hackneyed, a trite narrative that overseas Filipino communities and the rest of the other migrants, for that matter, contribute to the economic gains of the country via overseas remittances. But we're trying, in the experience that we've had here in the Filipino community in Dubai, we are trying to look at the migrant community as active contributors to social and cultural growth of the country as well. And of course, a little bit of political involvement, because as I said, this is one of the issues that they had used to leave the country, issues of governance, so that and hopefully they see a country, that their home country, getting better as far as governance issues are concerned, then there is a chance for them to go back and rebuild in that same manner that they've seen the other countries that they have migrated to. And as such, I guess what is very important is that there has to be a semblance of listening in the chat box that we had. We have so many, so much pointing out to the need to regularly meet the diaspora and try to understand what the international, what the migrant communities need, so that they are more involved and they're more concerned about what happens back home. Also, what is also very important would be for the government, the Philippine government, or the rest of the sending governments for that matter, to understand that it should not only be one way. It should not only the government trying to squeeze out the contributions from the migrant community for the benefit of the home country, but also for the benefit of the migrant community in the countries that they have chosen to migrate to, let's say in the United States or in Europe, where there are chances for integration to their society via citizenship. Most of the time, we hope to get the intervention of the migrant communities, because we want them to go back to our home countries and help out in our development, not necessarily making them even more succeed as a community where they are, let's say in the US or in the Middle East or in Europe. And this is something that's very important as well, because trying to get the feel of the internet of the migrant community, it must be necessary to show them that what we care for them is not only a one-way street, but we also care for their own success in the countries that they have chosen to migrate to or chosen to work to. So we also need to understand that there are differences in the way many of our migrant communities see their roles in national development. And this is important because, let's say, for instance, in the Philippines, where we have quite a number of regions and a number of people who speak different languages, sometimes their regionalism is brought when they are abroad. And what is necessary is to find out that each of the migrant community, let's say, the Ilocano or the ones from the northern Philippines, have a different set of record as far as understanding what their role is for national development is concerned compared to their other regions. And this is something that needs to be done by government as well. And there has to be a diaspora mapping exercise that us, the people in government, must be able to undertake for our overseas migrant communities. And this is something that needs to be done. And of course, this is something that needs a lot of money and work and skilled and cooperation also with the academe. And this is hopefully this is one that is able eventually to build trust between the government and the migrant communities of the diaspora. Of course, we've also said a while back that we have to mainstream diaspora and migration policy issues in discussion within the ambit of foreign policy. Them actually playing a part in drafting, implementing, executing foreign policy relative to migration. And, most of the time, many of our diplomats would tend to look at foreign policy development only within the terms of the with the host country, with the origin country, and not using the perspectives and engaging the perspectives of our migrant community so that they are part of the active role in drafting these sorts of issues. Sorry, my little boy is running around. So this is important. To build trust, we must be able to show that there is something to be trusted as far as the government is concerned. Many always dismiss government as somebody that segment that is not to be trusted, and so that leads to a breakdown of process of collaboration between the migrant communities. And this is and I guess it has to begin with listening to how the migrants perceive themselves as part of the country that they had left behind.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your valid point of view. At this point, because we are running a little bit short of time, I would like to thank our participants very much for their engagement in the chat. All of your questions will be addressed hopefully during the Q&A just in a few minutes. And you can continue to ask your questions and we will hopefully be able to address them all. At this point, I would very much like to ask our panelists, Professor Delano, Mr. Tupoussan, and Dr. Osman Abdi, if they would like to shortly react on the points that have been made from our respondents. Would you like to react?
I'll just say briefly, I really like that the concept of listening has been so central in the conversation, and to really think deeply about the politics of listening, because I often see, as I said in my intervention, so many forums that are organized to listen, but not in an active type of listening way. It's mostly just the receiving of information without continuity and without a response. So I think listening has to be thought of as one of these processes of accountability, where it's not just information that comes in and is received, because it replicates hierarchies of power, right? Who speaks and who listens. So how can there be spaces where there is true listening that turns into action, right? And that's what I mean by this active listening, and that it's as Mr. Cortez said, a process that is continuous, right? That there is a consistent, many people have mentioned this, a consistent space where there is listening, and that it doesn't just come when the government decides that it wants to listen, but that there is also an opportunity for diasporas to express when they have something to say and what needs to be listened to, and that there is an openness for this. And of course, there are political tensions that often prevent these spaces from truly becoming a space of listening that turns into change, into transformation that is mutually built. I think the idea of mutuality is so central here, and it requires a willingness to change the structures and the hierarchies of power that are embedded in these relationships, and that is extremely difficult without trust and without a willingness to really shift the boundaries of representation and design and implementation, and who decides that and who acts upon that, if it's always going to be limited by a hierarchy of a government that is still in the sense of serving a population whenever it's convenient to its needs. So listening, I think would be central. Rethinking the concept of listening and acting upon that, I think would be really could be a place for shift.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that is very important to build trust. Absolutely. We've got 4 more minutes. If our other panelists would like to react on their points of view on how to face the challenges that were just mentioned. Yes, Mr. Tupuisson, you can.
Oui, merci. Sur la question de confiance également vis-à-vis sur le territoire d'accueil, hein, j'ai décrit l'expérience que mène le Forum depuis de nombreuses années et qu'elle continue à faire parce que sa volonté aussi, c'est d'aider, d'accompagner à ce que les différentes entités, alors issues des migrations, parfois on le dit, et d'un autre temps on dit de la diaspora, mais tout ça c'est la même chose parce qu'il y a une mobilité. Ce point commun, c'est qu'on a quitté une terre, notre terre je dirais, de territoire d'origine pour aller sur un autre. Mais sur la question de confiance avec les autorités des pays d'accueil, mais qui soit aussi se renforcer avec le pays d'origine, c'est la reconnaissance de l'expertise, du travail que ces personnes migrantes ont acquis au fur et à mesure des années passées sur différents territoires. Et elle doit être renforcée parce que c'est une façon de permettre aux pays d'origine d'être accompagnés par, je dirais, les enfants, les filles et les fils de la nation partis ailleurs. Mais c'est aussi cette possibilité, ce que nous défendons aussi au niveau du Forum, même si on est au nord, parce qu'on parle des pays du nord et les pays du sud, en ce qui nous concerne en France et en Europe, on est dans les pays du nord, mais nous nous considérons aussi comme étant du sud. Et on dit souvent que le sud aide le sud accompagne le sud, et étant de cette diaspora et nous considérons comme du sud, donc nous disons que notre expertise, notre savoir-faire peut être utilisé dans les pays d'origine, mais également sur un territoire beaucoup plus large parce que nous ne sommes pas enfermés simplement sur notre pays d'origine, que nous avons aussi ces compétences, cette possibilité d'aller accompagner d'autres territoires. Et c'est une action que nous défendons. Mais pour pouvoir la poursuivre, c'est vrai que c'est de dire qu'on peut faire confiance également, on peut travailler avec toute cette force et qui n'est pas simplement, je dirais, sur une catégorie d'individus, que nous avons cette expertise et cette volonté de travailler un peu partout dans le monde.
Yes, thank you very much. Due to our very, very strict time schedule, we need to move on. I would very much like to thank all of you for your very good points of view and everything that you have just been saying. I think it's good for us to just conclude with a few points that that were mentioned. For the future of these events, because I think this is just the beginning of the events. We need many more to start building trust and to maintain trust and to maintain strong diaspora globally. I think the recognition of diaspora qualities and diaspora as as a whole, as stakeholders, is the first step, probably by listening to each other, as has been mentioned by many of you, listening to all parties, listening to all stakeholders, including the diaspora, in order to understand each other more and to have joint implementations, joint strategies, and as well as transparency of those implementations and strategies being taken out in host and home countries, and evaluation. I think those are very important matters for all diaspora, to evaluate our projects and our work in our home countries in order to have sustainability, as has also been pointed out, and to include the diaspora in the host countries on every level possible, not only to have stronger diaspora communities, as was mentioned by the ambassador, because we all need each other in our host and home countries, but also to activate one another and motivate one another. I think that is very important, and to have a continuity of all of our work. We will now, let me see. Yes, I think we will now move on to our next session. If there is if I'm being correct, right, Larissa, we can now move on to our next session with the question and answers.
Please, yes.
Okay, so now I can give the floor to Mr. Andres, Dr. Andres Solimano. I'm sorry, I'm very sorry, for facilitating the question and answer session.
Okay, well, thank you, Nilofar. I'm pleased by the invitation from IOM to participate in this global exchange on diaspora and migration. I was asked to offer some remarks and then facilitate the Q&A. I'm not sure I do have the Q&A with me right now, but let me see. Okay, well, a few comments here. I think this topic is extremely important, though we are dealing with a quite heterogeneous concept with several different dimensions. We do have diasporas, professional diasporas. We have political diasporas, exiled groups. We have entrepreneurial diasporas. We have investors diaspora to some extent. We have movement from the global south to the global north, but also there is a degree of movement from south to south and also from north to north. So the concept of a diaspora has a multidimensional geographic meaning too. I think diasporas carry important benefits, both for the origin country and also for the destination country. The important development benefits. Well, first, and social benefits in a broad sense. Diasporas connect people in different countries by their physical presence. Diasporas are also mechanisms for diversifying risk between countries. I mean, people move from countries where there are less opportunities. I think this was touched by Mr. Cortés also in the previous his previous remarks. People in general move from countries with lower development levels, with less job opportunities, with lower wages, with a weaker system of social protection, with less opportunities in a broad sense, to countries where they have or they expect to have better opportunities. Now, this mobility, because of the pandemic, has been severely reduced. So we have to think that the pandemic will have an impact on the diasporas, on the size of the diaspora, and also on the perhaps on the flow of destination, because people will increasingly value more countries that have better health systems, better hospitals, and where vaccination and other preventive means are more in better supply. Now, well, we know that diaspora is an element for mobilization of savings. Some estimates say that for the group of developing countries, between 2.5% and 3% of their gross domestic product may be mobilized by diasporas. And this, it will go to the group of less developing countries. I mean, the least developed country according to the UN. This number may go up even to 9% of the GDP of LDCs. So we have a big potential of savings coming from diasporas. And also diaspora represent a mechanism for transfer of ideas, for transfer of culture traits in other regions, for transfer of technology, for transfer of information, etc. Now, the topic of trust or confidence is very important, because we may think that trust is like an oiling mechanism for these potential benefits to be realized. It's like an intangible asset that's in between. It's underlying, but if it lacks, perhaps if there is a lack of trust, perhaps this benefit may not accrue. Some of the previous presentation, Professor Alexandra Delano made an important point, I think, that saying, and also, if I remember correctly, Mr. Cortés and Mrs. Nahira, that if the conditions that people exit their home countries, left their home countries, are problems of grievances, governance, etc., there will be a potential distrust here. I think this can be amended. I mean, I think this can be repaired, but it's an important observation. We have to keep it in mind. I think diasporas, I think after the pandemic, are bound to increase quite sizable. Of course, here the international politics and the governance in the potentially recipient countries will play a role. Perhaps the US will be more open with the new administration to immigration to diasporas than it was under the previous administration of President Trump. In Europe, I don't know, I wouldn't dare too much to make very precise predictions whether Europe will be more open or more close to the arrival of new diasporas after the pandemic or during the pandemic, perhaps. Also, developing countries also may have different views on how to manage diasporas. There are very critical cases. The case of India these days is quite dramatic. And it's a big country with a very large population. And this may revert abroad. I mean, there may be there may be a big pushing set of pushing factors, pushing people out of India. Perhaps we are now in a scenario where international mobility is restricted, but this will be lifted at some point. So we have to be prepared for that. Okay, perhaps we can move to the Q&As, specific Q&As. Let me see if I have it here, Q&A. Well, one question is, how do you facilitate a collaboration with IOM on strengthening the diaspora communication, integration, and also repatriation? I am from South Germany. I don't see happening. Perhaps I can read the three questions, and then some of the panelists may want to take them. The second question is, thanking all the panelists and respondents, my question would be to all of them, are you aware about concrete examples when trust was achieved at local level and then building on that broaden to partnership with central level authorities? Marina Manki. The previous was Kasim Ojoy. And the third question is, can diaspora make a bank and do something for the migrants victims around the world, like World Bank and Asian Development Bank? Ranjit does. Can Diaspora make a bank? I mean, perhaps if they can create a bank, if I understand. All right, let's pose these 3 questions and then we continue. I don't know if any of the panelists want to take up one of these questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think just tell us in which order you want us to go.
I don't know. It's up to you. If you want to answer any of the 3 questions, go ahead.
Madame Delano.
No, allez. Okay, merci. So I also want to. I also saw a question that came up on the chat, so I'm going to answer that one too. From VJ that says, how do you see the trust deficit between immigrants and the receiving country? I think when we talk about dual loyalty, as it's commonly perceived, it's absolutely a limit, even if we know through years of study that transnational identities often lead to more active participation and sometimes more loyalty, even if it's between 2 countries, that there is more active engagement of diasporas at many levels, economic and political, and that it's having dual identities and dual political participation is not a limit, right, to their engagement. But there is a perception in society and in some political circles that this population can't be completely trusted in terms of where their loyalties are. If we could ever say that about any population, right, regardless of their national origin or their citizenship. But in the case of diaspora, this is more contested, and it is true that it limits their the relationship, not just with their country of origin, but also with their country of destination. But I think this really depends on how much that inhibits or not their access to rights. And that access to rights is also mediated by the status of migrants. That's why, I've been insisting on differentiating when we're talking about diasporas, what the characteristics of these diasporas, because if they have precarious immigration status and they don't have access to voting rights or possibilities for participating in labor unions or other forms of political organizing, then that will determine very much how much political power they can actually exercise. So this idea of being in no man's land, it really depends on their political status and whether they can mobilize to organize, lobbying, advocacy, vote, have voting rights, or other forms of political organization. So that would be some ideas to answer the question, your question about dual loyalty as a limit and political rights. And then I'll answer 2 of the other questions that came up in the Q&A. First, Marina Mankey's question about the role of local authorities and communities and examples of how initiatives at the local level have become stronger and broader at the federal level. I think one of them came up in the chat earlier, the 3-for-1 matching funds program that the Mexican government established. Originally, it started in the 1980s as a local initiative that was a 1-for-1 matching fund between communities in California and their state of origin in Zacatecas. And the success of that initiative and also its political symbolism and its economic potential was then matched by the state government, and then after that matched by the federal government until it became 3-for-1. And at what point it also became the 4-for-1 program where private corporations also wanted to participate in the matching funds scheme. So that's one, coming from the diaspora to the country of origin. But I've also seen examples of the country of origin providing services to communities in the country of destination by working on these local partnerships. So for example, the Mexican government's Health Windows program has started as a collaboration between one consulate in a particular community, including a hospital or a clinic or a foundation that wants to fund these health services that are provided through consulates to diaspora communities. And from those pilot programs at the local level, it has become a national program that serves all of the 50 consulates in the US. And similarly, the labor rights programs that the Mexican government started with the Ministry of Labor in the US also began as local partnerships that then expanded into a larger national program. So I think there are a couple of examples there, and very often at the local level, there are some possibilities because of the differences of infrastructure in local governments and the different politics at the local level that sometimes can diffuse some of the tensions that occur at the larger national level, and also the quality or the infrastructure of not just the local governments, but also how the diaspora itself is organized. And I think that goes to the last question that I'm going to answer to give everyone else time, but the Victoria Capatici's question about the lack of structure or organization, and how do you build trust when diasporas are still shaping their identities and voices? I think that's a fantastic question, and it really shows the difference in the spectrum of relationships between states and diasporas that also have to do with how well the diaspora is organized and has clarity about its needs and interests, right? Because to have a dialogue, there has to be an openness on the government side, but there has to be clarity and an organization on the diaspora side. So I think some of the ways that this has been possible is also when there is an investment is in supporting empowerment and organization in diaspora communities. So the government being a forum that provides a space for diasporas to talk to each other without the government necessarily being present, giving them tools for empowerment. I've seen, for example, courses that the government offers in partnership with universities or with other civil society organizations to how to create an organization, how to register it, how to create decision-making processes within an organization, how to set an agenda. So all of this empowers the building of organizations or the building of an agenda within a diaspora community that then can have a dialogue with its governments on both sides or with other institutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Delano. Je voudrais donner la parole à Monsieur Tupoussin, s'il vous plaît. Very short, oui. Please, because we are short of time.
Si je peux répondre, en tout cas apporter des éléments sur le deuxième point, c'est concernant des exemples de confiance construits entre la diaspora et les communautés, les autorités locales. Et donc, dans mon intervention début, je vous parlais de l'initiative que mène le Forum, qu'on appelle les rencontres internationales Sud. Donc, ces rencontres internationales Sud permettent, lors des missions, lorsque nous visitons les projets des associations de diaspora, on fait une rencontre avec les autorités locales, voir le gouvernement, voir les ministères, s'ils ont des ministères ou des secrétariats de diaspora dédiés. Et dans cet échange-là, nous essayons de mettre en relation, de mettre en discussion la diaspora de notre réseau et les autorités locales. Et je vous disais qu'également qu'il y avait des conventions qui sont signées, et ces conventions permettent d'établir un contrat. Mais ce contrat de confiance, c'est aussi des échanges pour permettre à la diaspora d'avoir accès à un certain nombre de services dans le pays, au niveau avec les associations. Mais c'est aussi dans les relations d'avoir des interlocuteurs un peu plus directs pour leur faciliter le développement, en tout cas la réalisation de leurs projets dans le pays d'origine. Et ça, c'est très important. Et nous essayons à chaque fois de multiplier. Nous avons fait 15 rencontres internationales Sud dans différents pays, de continent africain, de l'Asie, jusqu'en dans les Caraïbes. Et voilà, on essaie de signer des conventions. Ensuite, encore plus concrètement, c'est la confiance et l'implication. C'est un programme qu'on appelle Co-développement Mali, qui est devenu le PMMD, donc c'est de l'État du malien. Et ben, il y a aussi cet échange, cet investissement sur des projets d'initiatives je dirais, dans les localités maliennes. Et la diaspora malienne est fortement impliquée avec les autorités maliennes pour développer une localité ensemble sur je dirais, à travers un projet, bien évidemment, de développement sur lequel ils se sont tombés, je dirais, ils sont tombés d'accord pour que la diaspora puisse apporter sa contribution dans le développement de la localité. Donc oui, il y a des exemples concrets où la confiance, ça met du temps, mais lorsqu'on voit aussi que en fonction des pays, des territoires d'accueil, par rapport au pays d'origine, lorsque vous avez une diaspora aussi qui est importante, eh ben, c'est une forme de pouvoir, de puissance aussi de cette diaspora parce que, je dirais, le nombre oblige aussi le pays, les autorités du pays d'origine à regarder cette diaspora d'une autre manière et donc à l'impliquer un peu plus dans le développement des localités ou dans le développement du pays d'origine. Merci.
OK, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Toussaint. Thank you very much. Now to Dr. Horam Osman, please. Your turn to address some of the questions.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
I think the discussions have been, thank you very much, Dr. Soleimano. And I would really like to applaud and agree on all the points raised by my fellow panelists today. And I think these questions that have been raised today are actually quite valuable. I'm going to choose to address the part on how to create trust, especially between the diaspora and local communities. We find through examples that we've lived through here, especially here in Somalia, we find that skepticism also occurs, especially when diaspora communities come up with very innovative projects and fundraising schemes that want to help diaspora communities. And this is not without merit because at times some problematic initiatives do actually get in the way of real initiatives. So some people could be pretending to be fundraising for a noble event while they end up spending the money raised in illicit financing of terrorism or even worse things. So how do we build trust between local communities when they speak out for their needs, for example, and between the diaspora who are there to or are ready to respond to these needs through either action by coming on the ground and doing something themselves, or by fundraising, lobbying for attention or policy change. I think it's a challenge, but the most effective way would be to have a government body or to include the government in facilitating some form of diaspora engagement. There are diaspora engagement offices in many foreign affairs ministries around the world. Somalia is one of them. I think that there should be a bit more empowerment for these kind of institutions which have the legal capacity to convince people to find a notion of trust, while at the same time they could act like as the middle guarantor for both sides of the coin, for where the demand is and where the need is. And as when it comes to the diaspora himself, negotiating his own identity in a new setting. I think somebody raised that question, if I'm not mistaken. I think the issue of negotiating identity, I mean, it's not something that will ever be resolved. for me, myself, I was born in Saudi Arabia. I was raised there. Then I went to China, spent a decade and a half there, and then I'm back in Somalia. You tell me, am I Somali? Am I Chinese? Am I Arab? But the question is, regardless of how I see myself, sometimes the issue with negotiating identity is how others see you. So in certain settings, with people who know about my background, they wouldn't consider me as Somali. They would consider me as more of an Arab because a lot of my culture is affinitive to an Arab culture. And for those of you who know me in China, consider me more, somebody who's adopted more Chinese characteristics and Chinese cultural norms. And they would also argue that my Chinese side would overwhelm both my Somali and my Arab side. And then here in Somalia, while I'm engaging with Somali locals, they do not consider me as a Somali. They consider me as a diaspora. Although I would adhere to say, how do you consider me as a diaspora? When I was in China, I asserted my identity as a Somali. When I was born and raised in Saudi, I asserted my identity as a Somali. However, in Somalia, people around me argue that I am not Somali simply because I do not share the same experiences they share. My language proficiency is not as good as theirs. Or sometimes there are some cultural norms I may not be versed in. So how do you kind of negotiate that within you and with everybody around you? I think this is something I would leave for the experts, but it's still something that baffles me as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting remarks on the complexities of identities in a hyper-globalized world these days by Dr. Osman Abdi. Okay, I think we will have to stop here the Q&A session and turn the floor to Dr. Binod Kadria for his closing of the session and his remarks. Thank you very much to the panelists.
Hello, everybody. Am I audible? I hope so. Thank you.
Yes, you can be.
I think it has been a very, very rich conversation that we have had over the last more than an hour and a half. And to make, to close the session is to cut it short because of the time. So whenever I end up in such a situation, I tend to think that God created time and man made the haste. So we are all in a haste. I don't know what for, where are we heading to? So those are the questions I think are very central to the issue that we are debating today, maximizing diaspora engagement. And one of the three in the series is building trust for diaspora engagement, as we heard from in the beginning, and then from the moderators, and then from the speakers and the respondents. I'm tending to think and take myself back to the three issues that were flagged right in the beginning. Why trust is relevant, and then its engagement at the local, national, regional, and international level, whether they build trust, help in building trust. Which one? Comparatively, we need to look at which one of these help in building trust. And then, of course, the best practices, what works, what are the good practices, and so on. We heard a number of case studies, examples, and so on. But what I think is at the core of building trust in the diaspora is the social capital. Social capital are something that perhaps we cannot touch, we cannot move, we only can feel. And that's where I think issues like transparency, like integrity, like loyalty, and those that have been mentioned, identity, these are the considerations, are the building blocks of trust. Now, that I think is very central to be addressed. What are the components of the trust? And when we address what are the components of the trust, trust among whom? Trust in the diaspora? Is it a homogeneous category? I think Andre mentioned right in the beginning that it is not a homogeneous category. We have occupational classifications, we have professional classifications, we have regional classifications, we have men and women diaspora, student diaspora, and so on. So diaspora is a very heterogeneous concept. We need to understand that, and that I think would help us in understanding what is trust across these categories and how to build them, particularly in the context of a crisis situation like COVID-19, which had actually triggered the earlier series last year of the diaspora. Having said that, I tend to think about trust as a collateral. Trust cannot be a manna from the heaven, that we make a wishful thinking that there will be trust and, God creates trust. It does not happen. It is man-made. It has to be made by ourselves. So there has to be accountability. If there is a breach of trust, then there has to be an accountability. And I tend to borrow from history. I tend to borrow from the father of the nation of this country, Mahatma Gandhi. His date of return to India from South Africa, he fought for anti-apartheid movement there, and then he came back to India to take the cudgels of the independence movement in 1915 on 9th of January. And that day is celebrated in India every year as the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. It is Indian Diaspora Day. So that is the celebration. And that, I think, is, whether it is symbolic, whether actually it matters, we all need to create these symbols in all the countries. We need to take pride in our diaspora. It doesn't happen overnight. As one of the speakers said, it takes time. It took time in India. As India got freedom in 1947, Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, in the Fiji, in Africa, and so on, those were the old diaspora. We have to make that distinction also. The old diaspora and the new diaspora. The new diaspora are the doctors and the STEM professionals and the IT professionals. But the old diaspora were the colonial coolies. They were taken by the British regime, by the British colonial government, to the plantation economies in Fiji, in Malaya, and so on. They are still divided. So we need to address them together. That, I think, is central to the issue of building trust. They don't have trust amongst each other. So intra-diaspora trust is also very important. We cannot just simply, take a broad brush and say diaspora means one homogeneous category. That, I think, is very, very central. So if we think in those terms, then India started with non-aligned movement under Prime Minister Nehru, first Prime Minister, and it distanced from the diaspora on the pretext, on the ground, that India will not interfere into the internal affairs of other countries. That raises a question about the definition of diaspora. What is a diaspora? I think it has moved from very specific, the Jews without the homeland, to very generic today, where we consider every migrant a part of the diaspora. Whether it is non-resident Indians, whether they have become naturalized citizens of other countries, whether they are students, whether they are others, whether they are family, whether the seed migrants. So I think we need to put our mind to identifying what a diaspora is. If we do that, then we understand that in the Indian case, India had distanced itself from its diaspora, but there was a turning point in 1977 when the government changed and there was a shaking of hands with the diaspora. And that has continued even with subsequent governments. And India actually put in place a high-level committee on Indian diaspora in 1998. Someone said we need to do mapping of the diaspora. Yes, India did at that point of time, 20 million Indians across the globe. Today, we say there are 32 million. But is it a correct figure? Because the United Nations said the largest diaspora in the world is 17.5 million Indians. Why this big discrepancy? So we need to deconstruct the component of the diaspora. I'm not going to give the answers here because we are short of time, and I've been asked to cut short my intervention so that we can all we go back with something that we learned from this, this gathering. So to cut a long story short, I am saying that in the case of India, India started from mistrust with the diaspora, and today it is a highly trustworthy relationship that is being built between the government and the diaspora. But what about the one diaspora or sub-diaspora? India has 28, 29 states, and every state has its own subnational identity that also seeps into the diaspora. Language issue, somebody mentioned, we have so many languages in India, and the diaspora speaks its native language, not national language, it's local language. That also divides the diaspora, and there is mutual mistrust because of that. So we need to address this. I'm taking an example from Bangladesh. We have Bangladesh ambassador here. The Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, professor of economics, came back from United States for contributing to his motherland, Bangladesh. And what did he create? He was called the banker of the poor. And he created the Grameen Bank, which became a hallmark of trust. That created microfinance for the rural female workers coming together and doing some kind of revenue generating work. The return ratio of the loans was 97.8%. If you compare that with Lehman Brothers, then that was less than 60%, which led to the collapse of the US economy and drove the entire world into recession in 2007-8. So we need to understand why the diaspora, why the collateral of the trust, and that was without collateral. That Grameen Bank was giving that loan to these self-help groups without a collateral. The collateral was simply trust. If you break that trust, you are no longer eligible to get that loan again. You are black, you are blackened, your record is blackened. So I'm saying that trust will not fall from the heaven. We have to create accountability, reciprocity, and all those conditions that are required. So there are even countries from the north where ECOLA, for example, an academic forum in Australia that criticizes Australian government's policy about diaspora and says that its engagement with the Asian diaspora is valuable. It needs to have reciprocity and not by narrow, personal interests of selfishness. So that is where we need to drive the trust, build the trust through loyalty, and there is one more component. I need to say that about social capital, time. How much time people are willing to give to building trust. Time is the most valuable component, variable input that we tend to miss out. And that is opportunity cost. And that is where I think we perhaps can draw lessons from. I would like to end here. That is not the end of the discussion, but certainly a beginning, which is going to pave the way for our second one in the series on funding, and then another one at the end on sustainability. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Binod Kadria, for that. And I have been given the humble task of just giving a very quick vote of thanks, and maybe firstly to say thank you to our very active audience that has been in the room chatting away, but also providing some very thought-provoking questions to our panelists. So thank you for those interventions, and also just to thank the interpreters for having sailed through this 2-hour intervention or this 2-hour meeting here and helping us to be able to understand each other through the airwaves. Let me go back to the institutions first that have hosted us. Many thanks to the Africa Europe Diaspora Development Platform, ADEPT, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, CSUN, the Global Research Forum for Diaspora and Transnationalization, GRFDT, and IOM iDiaspora for hosting this global exchange, this global virtual exchange. And as Professor Binod Kadria said, that this will not be the end. Thank you to all the colleagues who are behind in the chat rooms and in the different functions, just having put this together. A very warm and special thanks to our speakers who have spent time with us this afternoon to deliberate. Professor Alexandria Delano from the new school, Mr. Makendi Topusan from Forum, Dr. Hodan Osman Abdi from the Center for East African Studies, Honorable Paul Raymond Cortes, the Consul General to Dubai and North Emirates from the Philippines, Her Excellency Nahida Soban, the Ambassador of Bangladesh to Jordan, and of course our excellent moderators who have led us throughout the session today. Dr. Nilfor Rahim, thank you very much for being here with us, and Dr. Andreas Soleimani, we are grateful that you could spend time with us, and also just to thank our opening and closing speakers, Ms. Monica Gorachi from IOM, and as well as Professor Binod Kadria for just giving us that resounding close, and I think a lot of food for thought. We thank everyone for being here, for having participated very actively through your inputs and contributions in the chat. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you for our next event, which will be taking place in May. So we ask you to keep your eyes on our Twitter, on all the organizations I've mentioned before, have that information already, I think, reflecting on our different platforms. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.